Sejak pandemi, screen time manusia di dunia meningkat 2 kali lipat. Kita jadi lebih dekat dengan dunia virtual, beserta kejahatan siber di dalamnya, yang siap mengincar keluarga maupun usaha yang kita kelola. Pada tahun 2019, terdapat 260 juta serangan siber. 45% di antaranya menyerang UMKM dan hanya 14% yang telah mempersiapkan diri. Hal ini beresiko menghambat perkembangan ekonomi. Sudah saatnya kita sebagai perempuan paham tentang keamanan siber. Perempuan berperan penting dalam pendidikan dan perlindungan keluarga. Selain itu, perempuan adalah pemimpin 90% UMKM yang ada di Indonesia. Oleh sebab itu, UK Indonesia Tech Hub dan Installer Indonesia menghadirkan CybHER, Internet Aman untuk Perempuan, untuk memberikan edukasi seputar keamanan siber yang diperlukan perempuan. CybHER, program yang didanai oleh Inggris dengan tujuan untuk memberdayakan dan menambah keragaman sektor teknologi Indonesia ini berisi panel discussion, workshop, mentoring, matchmaking, design thinking, prototyping, demo session, dan Cyber Ambassador Program yang bisa diikuti oleh perempuan di seluruh Indonesia. Menghadirkan para ahli, konsultan, dan pemangku kepentingan bidang keamanan siber untuk memberikan pelatihan gratis. Kami ingin semakin banyak perempuan menguasai cyber security sehingga bisa mewujudkan dunia virtual yang aman dan nyaman bagi kita semua. Selain itu, cyber security bisa jadi tujuan karirmu selanjutnya loh. Selamat mengikuti rangkaian program CybHER. Jadilah solusi keamanan siber bagi keluarga dan lingkungan sekitar.
Selamat sore, pegiat keamanan siber. Selamat datang kembali di program CybHER Internet Aman untuk Perempuan, sebuah program inklusif untuk mengedukasi dan memberdayakan perempuan Indonesia melalui transformasi keamanan siber. Bertemu lagi dengan saya, Melanie Apriliana, yang akan menemani teman-teman untuk internet yang lebih aman bagi perempuan Indonesia. Apa kabar teman-teman semua? Sudah nggak terasa ya, ini adalah minggu kedua dari program CybHER. Aku senang banget karena masih semangat nih ketemu teman-teman yang juga masih mau ikutan untuk belajar bersama dengan kita semua di program CybHER Internet Aman untuk Perempuan. Semoga kita semua selalu dalam keadaan baik dan aman untuk mengikuti diskusi pada sore hari ini. Kami menyediakan fitur penerjemah bahasa isyarat bagi teman tuli, serta penerjemah lisan dari bahasa Inggris ke bahasa Indonesia. Nah, bagaimana cara mengaktifkan fitur penerjemah lisan ini? Yuk, kita saksikan dalam video berikut ini.
Ladies and gentlemen, you may access the simultaneous interpretation feature by clicking on the globe icon on the bottom right of your screen. Or if you're using a cell phone, click on the 3 dots on the bottom right hand, then click on Language Interpretation. Choose English if you would like to hear the interpretation in English. Choose Indonesian if you would like to hear the interpretation in Indonesian. However, please do not click Mute Original Audio to ensure that you can continue to follow the floor discussion when there is a switch in floor language. For the speakers, please choose the same channel as the language you're using. For example, choose English to speak in English and Indonesian to speak in Indonesian, to avoid a collision of voice with the interpreters. Thank you. Para hadirin yang terhormat, untuk menggunakan fitur penjuru bahasaan secara simultan, silakan tekan tombol bola dunia di bagian kanan bawah. Atau jika menggunakan telepon genggam, silakan tekan 3 titik pada bagian kanan bawah, kemudian Language Interpretation. Silakan pilih channel yang Anda butuhkan, klik English untuk mendengarkan terjemahan dalam bahasa Inggris, atau Indonesian untuk mendengarkan terjemahan dalam bahasa Indonesia. Mohon jangan menekan tombol Mute Original Audio agar bisa tetap mendengarkan acara walaupun terjadi perubahan bahasa. Bagi para pembicara, silakan pilih channel sesuai dengan bahasa yang ingin Anda gunakan. Misalnya, pilih English untuk berbicara dalam bahasa Inggris, dan pilih Indonesian untuk berbicara dalam bahasa Indonesia untuk menghindari percampuran suara dengan interpreter. Terima kasih.
Terima kasih teman-teman interpreter atas penjelasannya. Jadi teman-teman, untuk mengaktifkan fitur penerjemah lisan, silakan menekan tombol bola dunia di bagian bawah layar Zoom kamu dan pilih opsi Bahasa Indonesia. Sebaliknya, untuk teman-teman yang ingin mengikuti acara ini dalam bahasa Inggris, silahkan klik tombol bola dunia dan pilih opsi bahasa Inggris. Panduan menggunakan fitur interpretasi ini bisa kamu simak kembali di kolom chat. Nah, teman-teman, aku imbau untuk mengikuti acara sampai selesai ya, karena aku mau ngajak teman-teman semua untuk seru-seruan nih sama kita di program Cyber Ambassador Creative Campaign yang akan aku sampaikan di akhir acara nanti. Dan juga nanti aku akan mengumumkan para pemenang CybHER Quiz pada hari Sabtu 12 Februari 2022 yang lalu. Jadi jangan kemana-mana ya. Saya juga mau ajak teman-teman nih untuk mengisi pre-test terlebih dahulu pada link yang ada di kolom chat. Tim moderator bisa dibantu untuk memberikan link pretest pada kolom chat, dan teman-teman, link pretestnya mohon untuk diisi karena kami akan merilis sertifikat bagi teman-teman yang mengisi link pretest dan post-test di semua rangkaian acara CybHER. CybHER adalah program kolaborasi antara UK Indonesia Tech Hub, bagian dari Kedutaan Besar Inggris dan A Great Partnership Inggris-Indonesia, dengan Instellar Indonesia, sebuah perusahaan yang bertujuan membantu usaha-usaha sosial untuk berkembang dan berdampak. Melalui program CybHER, UK Indonesia Tech Hub dan Instellar memiliki misi untuk mengedukasi dan memberdayakan perempuan Indonesia lewat transformasi keamanan siber. Program ini didanai sepenuhnya oleh Inggris dan bertujuan untuk memberdayakan dan menambah keragaman sektor teknologi Indonesia. Acara kita sore ini ditayangkan secara langsung melalui Zoom dan dapat disimak di YouTube channel British Embassy Jakarta. Kamu juga bisa menyaksikan ulang acara peluncuran program CybHER serta diskusi panel tentang hoax, privasi, dan bijak berinternet untuk ibu dan perempuan pada pekan lalu di YouTube channel British Embassy Jakarta. Sebagai bagian keempat dari rangkaian program CybHER, sore ini kita akan ngobrol seputar melindungi bisnis dari serangan siber. Di sini telah hadir tamu spesial langsung dari Inggris. Kita sudah kehadiran Melanie Oldham Order of the British Empire, CEO dan founder dari Bob's Business, serta Neil Frost, COO dari Bob's Business. Teman-teman, Bob's Business adalah sebuah perusahaan keamanan siber dari Inggris yang menggunakan teknik kreatif dan menarik untuk meningkatkan kesadaran keamanan siber serta perilaku berinternet yang positif dan aman sejak tahun 2007. Bob's Business telah membantu banyak perusahaan dan organisasi di Inggris, dan hari ini spesial Bob's Business akan berbagi kepada kita semua untuk internet yang lebih aman bagi perempuan Indonesia. Dan perbincangan kita sore ini akan dimoderasi oleh Kak Paramitta Sari atau Kak Tata, seorang cyber security consultant Horangi, juga telah memberikan isi panel pada pekan lalu. Greetings to Melanie, Neil, and Kak Tata. Nice to meet you, and we cannot wait to learn from all of you in this afternoon. But before that, I would like to invite our moderator and panelists today for a photo session, so please kindly activate your camera. Baik, teman-teman peserta, kita 2, 1, smile. All right, once again, in 3, 2, 1, smile. All right, thank you very much everyone. Oke, teman-teman, seperti yang sudah saya sampaikan, sesi belajar kita hari ini akan dipandu oleh Kak Tata, seorang cyber security consultant dari Horangi. Kak Tata adalah sarjana ilmu komputer dari Universitas Bina Nusantara tahun 2020 dengan peminatan keamanan siber. Nah, selama menjadi mahasiswa, Kak Tata juga aktif mengikuti kegiatan kemahasiswaan, program magang, dan berbagai kompetisi keamanan siber. Jadi Kak Tata ini adalah seorang mahasiswa yang berprestasi. Luar biasa Kak Tata ya. Dan sekarang sebagai seorang konsultan keamanan siber, Kak Tata berpengalaman dalam melakukan vulnerability assessment dan penetration testing pada situs web, aplikasi, dan perangkat elektronik. Nah, buat teman-teman yang penasaran apa sih yang dilakukan Kak Tata sebagai cyber security consultant, nanti bisa tanya-tanya langsung juga ya selama sesi diskusi. Saya mau sapa dulu Kak Tata sore ini. Halo Kak Tata, bagaimana kabarnya?
Halo Kak Melody, baik banget hari ini. Gak sabar banget sih kita untuk sharing session ya hari ini.
untuk dengerin Kak Tata dan teman-teman dari Bob's Business. Baik, Kak Tata sudah siap ya untuk diskusi sore ini?
Iya, siap, Kak.
Oke, teman-teman, mari kita belajar bersama tentang Lindungi Bisnis dari Serangan Siber bersama Bob's Business dan moderator Paramitta Sari. Kak Tata, the screen is yours.
Okay, thank you, Kak Melody. Hello, good evening, everyone. Hope you guys are in very good condition. Okay, first of all, let me introduce myself. I am Tata, and I will be the moderator today. And first of all, I would like to say thank you for all the participants. It's more than 100 participants. Yeah, awesome. I'm very excited today. And also, thank you for Melanie and Neil, who will be our speaker for this event. Thank you for being here. I would like to inform you guys that this event has interpreter to translate from English to Bahasa or vice versa. You can click the globe icon in the Zoom application and choose the language. Jadi untuk teman-teman partisipan bisa memilih opsi Bahasa Indonesia, and for Melanie and Neil, you can choose English. Dan jangan lupa untuk teman-teman partisipan, jika ada pertanyaan, bisa langsung menuliskan pertanyaan di kolom chat ya, selama di kolom Q&A, selama presentasi. Oke, sebelum kita mulai, saya mau perkenalkan dulu speakers kita di acara kali ini. Yang pertama adalah Miss Melanie Oldham OBE. Hi Melanie, nice to meet you. How are you? Oke, Melanie merupakan CEO dari Bob's Business dan merupakan founder juga dari Bob's Business, yang merupakan sebuah perusahaan inovatif di bidang keamanan siber pada tahun 2007. Nah, lewat Bob's Business, Melanie sudah banyak membantu meningkatkan kesadaran keamanan siber di banyak perusahaan dan organisasi di Inggris. Selama 20 tahun terakhir, Melanie aktif membantu organisasi dan individu untuk memahami lebih dalam tentang keamanan siber, serta manfaatnya dalam pekerjaan dan kehidupan sehari-hari. Bahkan Melanie juga sudah mendapatkan gelar OBE dari Ratu Inggris karena kontribusinya di bidang cyber security. Okay. And next, there is our second speaker, which is Mr. Neil Frost. Hi, Neil. Nice to meet you. Nah, Neil ini merupakan COO atau Kepala Operasional Bob's Business. Neil sendiri memiliki pengalaman selama lebih dari 15 tahun sebagai pemimpin senior di berbagai departemen negara Inggris, termasuk memimpin edukasi keamanan siber di Departemen Perpajakan, Departemen Kebijakan Keuangan Publik, serta Departemen Digital, Budaya, Media, dan Olahraga. Keterampilan Neil yang mumpuni di dalam bidang pelatihan keamanan siber ini juga diakui oleh banyak perusahaan besar di Inggris. Di Bob's Business, Neil fokus mengepalai bidang manajemen sumber daya manusia, jaringan pengiriman konten, dan engagement. Okay, then we already know our speakers, and now I would like to welcome and give the time and also the place to Melanie and Neil to share their knowledge with us. Please, Melanie and Neil, the screen is yours.
Thank you very much. Bear with me 1 second while I try and kill my audio from my other translations. Apologies. Technology is great when it works. So good morning, everybody. Nice to see you all today. I'm hoping that I've managed to share my screen. So let's see if this works okay with you. Okay. Hopefully now you can see my screen. Is that right? Is everything okay? I can have a bit of a thumbs up or a virtual confirmation that you guys can hear me.
Yeah, that's fine, Melanie.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, so thank you very much for joining myself and Neil this morning. My name is Melanie Oldham, as was given in my bio, and I've been working in the cybersecurity industry now for over 18 years. My journey into cybersecurity wasn't initially what I expected, if I'm honest. My background was actually in events marketing, and then I moved into project management, and then one day found myself agreeing to a project where I was airdropped into an IT team of 13 techies and thought that this was going to be the shortest career move I'd ever made, because as far as I could see it at the time, they spoke a language that I didn't understand. They had minds that far superseded mine, and their intelligence just, I guess, wowed me. So I felt a little bit out of my comfort zone. I was put in a situation where I just felt that it just wasn't naturally fitting to me. But one of the areas that as an organization we were working on was how to implement the standard ISO 27001 within the organization. So ISO 27001, for those of you who don't know, who is an international framework for implementing good security management and practices. And at the time, the IT team just seemed to be banging their heads against a wall, trying to get people to change their behaviors and their habits, and people just weren't doing it. So I kind of came in as a bit of a translator, and I took what was the technical jargon and translated it into a language that everybody else could seemingly understand. And to help me achieve this, we used animation and storytelling and tried to make the scenarios relatable to people. And that's where Bob's Business was founded back in 2007. Okay. So quick icebreaker for you is, what would your hacker name be? Can I ask you just to put in the chat? If I could ask you to put in the chat what you think your hacker name would be. So my hacker name would be Johnson Blue. So this is taking my mother's maiden name and adding my pet's name to it. So mother's maiden name being Johnson and my pet's name being Blue. So if I can ask you if you'd like to participate in this little icebreaker, it's what would your hacker name be? I always wanted to be a spook. I thought it'd be pretty cool to be there. Obviously, hackers by their default are slightly more malicious than spooks. So what would your hacker name be? It'd be interesting to know if you want to put that in the chat for us. So that's your mother's maiden name and your pet's name combined, and what would that make you? And my hacker name would be Johnson Blue. Okay. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, 15 years or 18 years now in the cybersecurity industry when I founded Bob's Business. I'm also a fellow of CybHER, which is the Chartered Institute of Information Security. I also am the director of the Yorkshire Cybersecurity Cluster, which is an ecosystem of cybersecurity professionals and those with an interest of cybersecurity in the Yorkshire and Humber region. So we get together as a community and a network to share best practice, to look at solutions, to guide one another and look at three core areas around skills, innovation and growth, and ecosystem development. I'm also the director of UKC3, which is the UK Cybersecurity Cluster. So a group of all the clusters throughout the UK. I'm also an advisory board on a number of companies, and as you know, earlier this year I got my OBE for services to cybersecurity. So it's my vision to try and make the UK and help organisations throughout the globe to make the environments they work and live in to be the safest to live and work online. That's what I'm hoping to achieve. Okay, so Bob's Business, as I say, briefly touched on, we have a number of clients from 5 employees up to sort of 80, 90 odd thousand employees throughout the whole of the UK and nationally. We provide cyber education, policy management, phishing exercises, cultural change programs, and concentrate predominantly on the human side of cybersecurity. In our time, we've helped over 2,000 companies reduce the risk of human risk reduction and trained over 5 million people. So I'd like to think that we kind of know what we're talking about today. And across the bottom are some of the certifications that we've gone through. So as an organisation, I know what it's like to have a startup organisation, to grow it, to take on new employees, win new contracts, and understand the hurdles that we have to go to make sure that we protect our company information, our personnel information, but also that we actually follow the standards needed in order to be able to win government contracts and so on and so forth. So as an organisation, I think it's fair to say that we've grown with information security in mind, and I can talk to you about how it's benefited the business, also areas where I found it particularly challenging. As I say, growing an organisation is not the easiest of things, and you know, you've got so much control, but ultimately your people are the most important asset that you have, and hopefully I'll be able to talk to you about the people within your organisation, how you manage that risk, and more importantly, where they really are your frontline defenders, and the most important, where you can encourage them to do the right thing. Okay, so just briefly in this presentation this morning, we're going to understand what human risk is, talk about the value of data and how easy it is to access, recognize the risks of merging work and play. So COVID's played a real, interesting time for us all in the way that we now work and operate. We've got this hybrid scenario where we're working from home, working from the office, working remotely in other locations. And this has obviously, to a degree, escalated some of the risks, given us fantastic opportunities in what we're able to achieve, but also change the onus of where that control sits from outside of the organisation environment. Indirect risks posed by your connections, so that's your peers at work, your family members, and how potentially they could put you at risk from a cyber attack. And talking about how we change mindsets and look at concentrating on cybersecurity as a personal mission and not just an organisational one. Okay. So just first of all, a couple of misconceptions. Sorry, before I jump into that, Neil, is there anything you want to sort of say on the introduction and the company overview?
No, that's fine. You carry on, Melanie.
Lovely, thank you. So Neil's here to support me today, to keep me in line, but also to make sure that I don't go too fast and miss any crucial points. But Neil came from client side, so I was fortunate enough to work with Neil within one of the government departments, delivering and helping him coordinate his cyber education awareness program. And because of the passion and understanding of what he was implementing, was a great asset to the team. Has been with the organisation now over 3 years, so it's really exciting times. So in terms of cybersecurity, a number of misconceptions. One, that cybersecurity is a technical problem, so one that needs to be predominantly dealt with by IT teams, head of compliance or information security officers, and the onus and responsibility should be on those guys. And what we've seen is a real spike in the stress that information security officers are under, but more increasingly now, cybersecurity is an issue for everybody and every business. And a lot of smaller organisations, like I'm sure there's a few on the call today, that don't have that technical resource, or they outsource that technical resource. But you as business owners, business managers and leaders need to understand your responsibility when it comes to cybersecurity. And unfortunately, just saying it's a technical solution that's been dealt with by the technical department or the outsourced technical team is not an acceptable answer. The responsibility that you have from a IT and compliance point of view, it's initially thought that obviously most cybersecurity is through malicious intent, and again, it's not. Unfortunately, a lot of cybersecurity breaches are around our intentions to want to do a good thing, but unfortunately, in doing those good things, we bypass cybersecurity controls and put the organisation at risk. So not all cybersecurity breaches are with malicious intent, and unfortunately, there's this misconception that cybersecurity is just a tick box that we need in order to be able to win contracts and to be seen to be doing the right thing. And yes, to a degree, some organisations do embark on it on a tick box exercise, but the reality of that is actually, if you want to grow and strengthen your organisation, taking outside and not just doing annual training once a year, you have to think about how you implement that from a cultural perspective. Okay, so the reality is cybercrime is a really lucrative business. There's lots of money to be made, which is why it's increasing in scale and growth. The most common form of attack is email compromise and ransomware. So something obviously we'll go to touch on later around phishing and the impact of phishing and the likelihood of phishing and spear phishing. So that's malicious emails coming into your inbox, trying to portray to be somebody that they're not. 90% of information security breaches are actually caused by human error. So we're fundamentally, the area that we need to address and we need to look at, as opposed to it being a technical problem. Obviously, this is how we interact with technology as well, but predominantly it's around our behaviours, our attitudes, and what we do with data that causes all the security breaches. As mentioned, it's a thriving industry, and it affects every business and every individual. So where it used to be said, nobody's going to attack me, your business is not necessarily the one that's under attack because they want to get to you. It's how they get to potentially your suppliers or just access to your systems to be able to leverage their capabilities from within inside your computers. And it's really a game about playing on emotions. What's great about us as individuals within an organisation is that we are powered by our emotions. This makes us committed to the organisations we work for to want to do a good job. But unfortunately, the things that drive us to do great jobs and be passionate about the jobs we do are the same emotions that criminals play on in order to see our weaknesses and our vulnerabilities. Neil?
I think there's one thing that needs to be stressed is that, you know, it's not a case of people being the weakest link. We hear that phrase in the industry a lot. It's just that they are overloaded and targeted by criminals constantly because they generally are looking at them as playing on that emotions, and that's their form of getting into any business. And so it's really, really important to understand that people need to be empowered to protect the business. And it's not just an IT issue, it is a human resources issue. You know, HR people need to be, you know, procuring training or awareness for staff to help protect those that are responsible for technology or process.
Perfect, thank you. Apologies, I hadn't realised I'd switched my camera off. I've just flipped between screens, so apologies for not being on camera previously. Okay, so obviously, as we mentioned, COVID has had a massive spike increase on the threat when it comes to cybercrime. And what we've seen is it's actually been classified as the largest cybersecurity threat ever. Email phishing attacks were the most common form of data breaches while working from home. And 47% of employees cited distraction as the reason for falling for email scams while they were working from home. And incidents involving payment and invoice fraud increased from between 112% between Q1 of 2020 and Q2. So 112% increase within 1 quarter of the year is quite a significant increase. Okay, so the NCSC published a report, so the National Cybersecurity Centre published a report saying that COVID pandemic emphasised the importance of cyber resilience, with resilience on internet increasing in a huge surge in COVID-related attacks. And as you guys will have seen, it's very much about, again, playing on those emotions, sending out email and phishing and fraudulent emails, trying to get to us to think about our health, our well-being, and the health and well-being of our families. And so that's what saw the increase in terms of those email campaigns. Anything to add, Neil?
No, nothing from me, Mel.
Okay. So as we touched on previously, 90% of breaches are caused by human error. So culture changes, but human behaviours are predictable. Cyber criminals know this, therefore 90% of attacks are a result of human error and people becoming the target. So how do we reduce us as that attack surface as that target? And that's what we need to concentrate on. And the question is, what is it about our behaviours that makes us so vulnerable? So in terms of human error, there are a number of causes for this. So that's poor communication. Apologies, Neil, can you just take over?
Yeah, there's a number of issues around human error, and I think one note that I will always say is the solution lies very much in when people are designing technology as a solution for cyber attacks or processes, is to really consider your end users, the people that are going to be functioning the equipment, to reduce that risk. And I think as we think about the design of cybersecurity and those fixes, we will hopefully see that reduction in human related risk. The best example I can give is the amount of times I've been on a Zoom call, really good piece of technology, but the amount of times I continue to perform human error by not unmuting myself on a regular basis is a perfect example of it's not the technology that is causing the issue, it's me functioning that piece of equipment, because I may well be on a web conference for a number of people, I may get distracted, I may have had a late night and I'm slightly tired. So as you can see on the screen, some of those human related issues factor in. It's a high number of things. It's not just a case of, you know, people are the weakest link. It's a, you know, those emotions, those issues coming to the fore on a regular basis. Melanie, you're back with us?
I am indeed. Thank you, Neil. Sorry about that. Okay. So in terms of what can you do as individuals and as organizations, is concentrate on some specifics when it comes to building your cyber resilience. And that's about having good governance, a good structure in place, understanding what your responses to incidents could be. Unfortunately, we see a lot of cases with organizations where they're just not prepared. So unfortunately, when an incident or something happens, unfortunately, what goes out in terms of communications and from that public relations point of view can sometimes be quite poor. And it's more that can do more damage to an organization and organization's reputation than anything else. So having good structure, having good policies in place. And, there is an argument to say, policies for policy's sake, do people really read them? But I think it's really important with your policies that you actually get the involvement of your employees in there, because we do see quite often that policies are implemented but not actually easy to achieve. So what happens is when people can't actually adopt those policies, they those controls, they circumnavigate them, and they actually find ways around them, which increases their security breach. So it's really, really important that you have, when writing your policies, that you have the involvement of your teams to make sure, is what you're asking achievable? Are there any barriers to achieving that? So that, as I say, that you have your teams on board, and then when something does happen, how do they respond to that? Because unfortunately, the people that control your social media channels, when typically what tends to happen is when a breach is out or somebody identifies a weakness within your system, what they will do is they will send something out on social media and say, are you aware of this vulnerability? And the reality is the tech team don't look at your social media. So what you have is somebody saying, oh, thank you for the notification, but not necessarily doing something with it or playing it down. And what you need to make sure is that actually your front-facing communication teams, so that's like marketing teams and social media, actually a little bit clued up as to, okay, if anybody reaches out suggesting that we've got a vulnerability or suggesting that we've got a breach, how do we deal with that? How do we escalate that? And how do we respond? Because what we tend to find is that actually we all have an understanding of cybersecurity breaches, and what the biggest damage to an organization really is when people respond in the wrong way. So they ignore the communications, they ignore the response, which makes people feel you don't think this is important to us. So it's really important to have really good communications that say, we're aware of the problem, we're dealing with it, please bear with us. And that obviously you practice those plans and you put them in place to see, how would the teams react if that happens. And HR, again, we don't put enough emphasis on HR's responsibility when it comes to cybersecurity. So making sure that they are there to act as a support for any employees that go through any incidences, any breaches, or, have a result of, our attack from a cybercrime perspective. Because if that goes wrong and it's that relationship that breaks down, that employee potentially could be, a bomb about to go off. So it's really important that the right support's put around individuals and dealing with that to make sure that insider threat doesn't become a bigger issue. Neil?
Yeah, just a couple of points further to this slide on what are good things to implement as a business. One would be make cybersecurity an agenda item on every meeting across the business, very similar to what a lot of people did with health and safety. If you're sat at board level, there is a trend now to see CISOs move into board positions so that they have that security position at senior level, which is really important. And then lastly, at Bob's Business, we've always championed businesses getting ambassador programs, or find people in your organization that love cybersecurity and give them a platform to influence others in the business, whether that's just putting posters up or performing sort of learn and lunch kind of events, etc.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, so typically, unfortunately, there has been historically a bit of a blame culture of them versus us. And if somebody clicked on a link, it would be obviously that, from their point of view, they get reprimanded for that. And I think it's really, really important to have a no blame culture. Going back to that point that Neil said about wanting to people be on side, and communications plays a really, really important part of this. So when Neil also mentioned about people having a passion or an interest in cybersecurity, they don't really need necessarily need to have that. They just need to be really good communicators and actually want to work with other teams across the organization as well. So when it comes to communications, it's really important that the messages are positive. So if you're thinking about, for example, running an anti-phishing campaign within your organization, then it's really important that you kind of let people know what you're doing and why you're doing it on the first sort of step. Because unfortunately, if you do something without telling people, you instantly get their backup and you instantly get resilience from those individuals. So it's important to tell people what you're doing and when you're doing it. Obviously, don't tell them when they're going to actually, the days that they're going to expect these phishing emails to come in, but you want to say, this is the campaign that we're running. We want you to be vigilant, and this is what we want you to do. Should you find one, we want you to report it. And then in the communications, when you're talking about, give feedback, we want to know what our impact is. And if you don't give feedback to individuals, then they'll stop giving you information, and it really needs to be a two-way dialogue. So it's really important that when you're sending out anti-phishing campaigns, that you turn around and say, here are the results from the last one. 65 of you spotted it and didn't click on the link. Well done for spotting it and reporting it. Because what you want to do is emphasize the good behavior, because by emphasizing the good behavior, you're then encouraging everybody else to follow suit. And we're creatures of habit, and we are, it's argued that our emotional responses versus our logical responses are significantly higher. So if you can tap on those emotional responses and us wanting to have that element of peer-to-peer influencing, then we're more likely to respond in a positive way and actually therefore report that phishing email rather than ignoring it. So it's about encouraging that. Neil?
Yeah, just to push on that, always err on the positive side of everything as opposed to the no, because we are fear driven within the cybersecurity industry. It's always percentages of negative performance as opposed to positive performance. So focusing on that as a business creates that behavioral change that leads to a positive culture around security. So Melanie's point there about phishing results, everybody always gives the percentage of people who clicked and not actually the 80 or 90% of people that didn't click, those that actually spotted it. And what you'll find by doing that is you'll then create a lower click rate for the long term, because people will want to be in the group that's successful and not the negative group.
Lovely, thank you. So leadership plays a really important part in this, and Neil touched on this earlier, and actually having board responsibility. And that's not, as I say, just within the IT teams, that's across the board. So it's your marketing teams, it's your HR teams, because they all play a really, really important point and role in sort of arming yourselves against cybersecurity. And making sure that we are adopting, say, that positive culture. Boards should be leading by example, and unfortunately what we tend to find is more often than not is cybersecurity training, awareness and education sort of sits amongst unfortunately a lot of senior management will get their PAs and assistants to complete their training for them. And again, obviously alarm bells when that happens, because you're leading by example. You need to be seen to be doing the right thing. So it's really, really important that as senior leaders, you participate in that training and also share examples of when you're subject to security breaches, because those stories that your employees can relate to are really, really important. So it's important when something happens to share those stories and show that actually you're human as well, and that we all make mistakes, and it's from those mistakes that we all learn. And making sure that cybersecurity is considered in all business decisions. So whether that's product development, procurement, so on forth, it needs to be across the board. Neil?
Nothing from me.
Okay, lovely. So as we've touched on, it's about creating that human firewall. So making your employees the strongest. So we turn organizations' biggest risk into their strength, their asset, and this human firewall. So getting to understand why is it so important, and this comes down to the cost of data, which people don't really generally understand and can relate to. So I guess the question here is, have you any idea what the cost of your data is when it's sort of let out online? And here is just some figures of what data can be bought at and the cost of that data being bought online. So again, just seeing there that you've got Facebook details. So they seem to be small amounts, but when you think about the quantities and how easy it is to gain that data, then it's, it makes quite big money. And do you ever know if you've ever been a victim of a phishing attack and had your data sort of compromised? Neil, anything to add?
Just to mention, most of these prices are found on the dark web and are continuously fluctuating based on value at that time. But data in itself has become the most precious commodity in the world.
Yeah. So in terms of the most common form of attack, we've touched on this, and that is phishing. So that's emails coming into inboxes pretending to be somebody they're not, to encourage our employees to click on links to share data. And the reality is that we know that a lot of these are asking us for login credentials to log into a system. And the reality is, from our login credentials, because we are creatures of habit, we tend to reuse the same usernames and the same passwords. And, you know, there's lots we can do to influence and change user behavior when it comes to password management. But the most effective thing that you can do as organizations is make sure that you actually enable two-factor authentication across all your online platforms. Unfortunately, the default for many organizations is to have two-factor authentication disabled, and then you have to enable it. If I had my way, I would encourage all software solutions to make sure that two-factor authentication was on by default. So that's where you have an application that gives you an extra code, or you get sent a text message to validate, because then that way, if your email address or your password is ever compromised and this information is posted on the dark web, then obviously you've got a backup to that. But the most effective way to manage against that would be obviously to have unique usernames and unique passwords. And I think one thing people really don't understand is the scale of the issue when it comes to password management. So passwords, you know, I've got in my password manager over 290 online passwords for different online accounts, and that's just growing and increasing the more systems we access. So the ability to create a password that is unique in our own capability without using a password manager just isn't feasible. So therefore, it's really, really important that understanding users by default do have weak passwords. Yes, we need to encourage that, but the simplest way to prevent people who have weak passwords is to enable two-factor authentication. But these, as I say, these slides are examples of phishing campaigns that are common and people do click on. So what we have is 91% of cyber attacks are a result of phishing emails. 80% of organizations around the world experience spear phishing attempts in 2019. And in April, Google blocked over 18 million daily malware and phishing emails related to coronavirus. So 18 million a day, specifically around coronavirus earlier in the year. And yeah, it's a really, really significant problem. Anything to add, Neil?
Just that because technology is stopping phishing emails more and more, Google, Microsoft, they have great ability to block these. What that's seeing is less people are being phished in work, but what that actually does is mean they're more susceptible to clicking on something when it does get through the filter. So therefore, there's a lot of talk about phishing simulations and whether they're of value. They are probably more of value now than they ever have been, so that you can heighten your staff's ability to spot something that's fishy.
Do you want to cover this slide for a second?
Yes, so just a quick point on some research that we've done. The top phishing email subject lines are there in front of you. They're using psychology and behavioural science to play on one of those forms of emotion. So the urgent invoice. So they're trying to get you to perform an action quickly to bypass that ability for you to stop and think. There's always some form of request attached, or there's that authoritative messaging with the important style emails.
Sorry, Melanie, for interrupting. Can you talk more slowly, please? Because our team is difficult to translate from English to Bahasa. Please talk slowly, yeah?
Yeah, no problem. Apologies.
Thank you.
I've just seen this in the chat.
Yes, apologies to everybody from me as well, first and foremost.
That's fine. Okay, thank you.
So from a senior leader's point of view, criminals see you as really lucrative targets, offering top-tier access to organizational systems, sensitive information and finances. And it's the perfect blend that makes you extremely attractive as a target. So that's, you're 12 times more likely to be targeted if you are a senior leader. And C-suite executives, as I say, more so than other employees within organizations, and that's according to the Verizon 2019 data breach. 71% of C-suite cyber attacks were financially motivated, with attackers looking for money from company or employee data, intellectual property, or ransomware. Traveling frequently means that you are relying on mobile devices and public Wi-Fi, and opening up more risk. So yes, there's a thought and perception that within our homes we're a little bit more secure. It's quite interesting. There were some surveys done about how our behaviours change within our home environment versus how they change when we're in other environments. And actually, we are a lot more relaxed, and this perception of being a lot less at risk when we're in our home environment. So our behaviours when responding to emails, we act very, very differently at home than we do in other environments. So it's something just worthwhile being mindful of. And then obviously, increasingly now, more and more locations outside of the home and outside of the working environment make it easier for us to work on other Wi-Fi networks. And obviously this poses the risk of people potentially being man-in-the-middle attacks. So that's where you log into a coffee shop Wi-Fi and somebody actually intercepts that communication, potentially pretending to be the coffee shop. So you log on, have access to the internet, and don't realize that your traffic is being looked at and being viewed, and people potentially being able to see the systems and the information that you're accessing. So it's really important that you understand as senior leaders how much more at risk you are, and our behaviors again just emphasize this. So just going quickly on them. So again, as with regards to spear phishing, being really, really careful that you are the targets. The spear phishing is those targeted attacks. I want to move on to something quite quickly now regarding social engineering, and also when it comes to how people access your information and why we're more susceptible now than we were before. So using social engineering as means to psychologically manipulate you, to trick you, to get you to make security mistakes, giving away sensitive information. So, key techniques for doing this are compelling storytelling, taking advantage of your trust and your curiosity. Have you won something? Have you come into something? Or requesting an urgent response. So we touched on this on the previous slide. And using information online to make requests that sound really legitimate. So we need to be able to be in a position where we step back and we think about who has access to our information and our data to be able to create those stories that are compelling. How do people know what our behaviors are? How do they know how to write to us to make us want to click on that link? And a lot of that comes down to our digital footprint. So this is the information that's available in the public domain that allows people to access information about us as individuals personally, and also regarding the organization through social media, audio, visual, pictures, text, documents, right the way down to being able to map our locations through geolocation data, and being able to define where we're moving from one location to the next. Neil, would you like to pick up this one?
Yes, so the classic digital footprint was the last slide: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. But a lot of the risk sits with the lesser known apps. The big one at the minute is Strava. The icon in the left there with a picture of that's Greenwich Park is a senior minister at government level who would leave his house, run to the office, then run back later in the day. As you can see from that image, it would show you the location of their home address and what government building they work in. That creates that picture of that person and how they can then be socially engineered, right down to what time of day they run, when they run. So these lesser known apps outside of the big 3 or 4 are a massive, massive risk to employees in businesses. So they need to be very wary of the settings that they're placing on them.
And I think this is one of the things is we all want to now start shouting about, you know, the exciting things or the healthy lifestyle that we're living to our friends and our family on social media. And this, you know, we're trying to communicate with people that potentially we don't have the time for now to pick up the phone call and share. So we're sharing vast amount of data about our behaviors, where we're going and what we're doing. It'd be interesting to know if these apps obviously translate over there as well. So, you know, maybe in the Q&A we can cover that. But from a behavioral point of view and our habits, we want to share information, but we don't always, again, lock down the privacy settings. So my advice and guidance again would be to try and keep work and play separate. So try to make sure that, you know, you're locking down your various different apps and the privacy to those apps only to the people that need to see them, and not necessarily sharing it with work and play. There is a whole framework, and again, there's an international framework which allows you to be able to use a number of apps to be able to see, you know, how do you find out usernames? Because again, we're creatures of habit and we tend to use the same username. Typically, our username always includes our first name and last name, and sometimes usernames tend to include first name, last name, and date of birth, all things that are unnecessary. When you create a username, there is no reason that you should have a need to include your first name or your last name or any personal details. And this is a real behavior we need to encourage and change amongst ourselves and our employees, so that when our data is released onto the internet, that actually people can't identify. Because what this allows people to do is not only to be able to identify which accounts we have with the same usernames and passwords, it also lets them identify which accounts we don't have. So it makes it really easy for identity theft, for people to create accounts where I don't have them, to form relationships with my connections because they're expecting me to use that same username and password, and therefore be able to, you know, to get further information regarding myself through communications there. One way of being able to identify if your information has been compromised is this website, which is Have I Been Pwned? And this isn't a phishing exercise, I promise. So this talks about how do you identify. It's a tool that was created by the National Cybersecurity Centre, and it allows you to put your email address in, and it will show you all the times that your email address has been compromised and the various different breaches it's in, and it will tell you which email addresses have or haven't been compromised. So it's a good one to try through personal emails, through work emails, and also through friends and family, just to see whether or not your email address has been compromised and been part of a data breach. And typically within those data breaches, you'll find that your passwords and your usernames have both been released at the same time. The other area of risk is indirect risk. So this is people wanting to get to you through your PAs. So PAs are the first line defense for senior leaders and criminals because they may be easier to get hold of. They're your entry points, they're easier to reach and more likely to respond, and by their nature they're supportive and try to be proactive and helpful. So it's just being mindful that people play on PAs quite a lot. The other risks, such as family, so your spouse, your children, posting on social media. So what are they posting? So one of the ways that when we do research on various different senior level individuals, we will actually look to see who's liked their posts. And from who's liked their posts and engaged with their posts, we will tend typically to be able to find family members. And what you'll find is those family members tend not to have locked down their data. So we tend to find a lot more about people through their behaviours of their friends and their family than we necessarily do about the senior leaders. So that goes back to the icebreaker that I set at the start when I asked you to come up with what is your hacker name. And what we know is, to be fair, cyber criminals, this perception is that they are guys in hoodies, when the reality is there's various different social media posts that are trying to get you to extract information, trying to provide information. So what we did in the previous, when we were asking you for your mother's maiden name and your pet's name to get your hacker name, obviously that's us trying to get your personal data, which allows us potentially then various different security questions that would allow us access to your systems. So increasingly, what we're doing on social media is responding to these requests, these gamified elements of interactive posts that our friends are sharing, and indirectly we're sharing our personal information. Neil, anything to add?
Just that the major banks were the ones asking for a lot of these as security questions. So I think they're trying to pivot some of the things that they're asking to stop this sort of data being shared online.
Yeah, I think the thing to remember again is that really sort of important thing is that we have two parts of our brain. We have our logical part of the brain, and we have our emotional part of the brain. And the emotional part of the brain is the one that responds, you know, sort of 12 times faster than the other. And it's really important to think that those things that make us feel loved, that make us feel wanted, that make us feel part of our community are the things that tend to make us make those harsh and fast decisions. So just engaging with things on a personal level is always something to be mindful of. So how do you minimize personal risk? And this is very much about making sure that you never use your work email for personal use. And never access it from an unauthorized device, using multi-factor authentication, so two-factor authentication, and using password managers where you can, and making sure that the one password that you really do secure and is strong and is unique is the one that accesses your email, which allows you to reset all your other passwords. There's no point having a weak, unsecure, unprotected by two-factor authentication email if that's the one that you reset all the other 200 plus email accounts from. So making sure you protect that one. Making sure that you have limited access to your accounts, check them, make sure that when you log onto your online accounts, check the privacy settings, check the security settings. Where else are you logged on? Are you still logged on anywhere? And, you know, removing and checking that access. Anything to add, Neil?
Nothing from me on that.
No. Okay. So how do we avoid social engineering, which is the most common form of attack? Say 91% of security breaches were as a result of phishing emails. Is not to be too trusting by, we are too trusting by nature, but how do we stop that, and to separate work life and play life? To slow down, ironically, says, as you're trying to translate what I'm saying, slow down what you're doing. So criminals want you to act fast and think later, and that's where you need to stop and think about all your online communications and system setups. Don't trust all links in emails. Use Google. If in doubt, research something and Google something to go to it directly rather than clicking on a link in an email. Research the facts. Who is this person? Who are they? Are they who they say they are? And obviously, if the offer is too good to be true, it most probably is. Neil?
Nothing further.
Okay, lovely. And if you want to learn more, obviously, Bob's Business, we have a host of online learning content around identity theft, around online web security, social media, phishing attacks, and obviously mastering malware and ransomware. And I think that comes to the end, which is hopefully just a minute off what it should have been. So hopefully that's been okay timing wise for you. Is anybody still there?
Okay, thank you, Melanie and Neil, for sharing with us. Since our participants are really enthusiastic and interested into them, for the first question, when we make an online payment using credit card, we are required to input the CVV number. Is it safe to write it in the application? Will the website save the CVV number? Is there any regulation that govern about this? Please answer, Melanie and Neil.
Okay, I'm happy to answer this one. One of the things that I'm really quite pleased about is new banking, and the ability that we now have with a lot of the new online banking applications is to be able to generate unique virtual credit cards. So I would definitely recommend, so the likes of Revolut and those sort of accounts. So if you're looking to use a website that you're not likely to use again, to use a virtual credit card that can then be destroyed after that, is a single-use credit card. Is it safe to use the CCV number, providing that website is a credible website and it has the padlock and the certificates, and you've checked the validation of that website, and it'll take you to, you know, through a secure method, then generally it is. What it isn't acceptable to do is to ever write credit card details down. So if you ever go into a merchant and they ask you to write it down, then that's illegal and against the law. What is right is to be able to put it straight into the PIN machine to record it, or put it into the website to record it that way. So it's about having an understanding that the sites that you're using are credible. So have you checked that they are who they say they are? And, you know, don't download any apps unless there are thousands of reviews on that and acceptance of previous people using it. I hope that helps. Neil, anything to add?
No, just exactly, if you're secure in where the source is and where you're inputting, then that's the key issue there.
Okay, thank you, Melanie and Neil. Maybe I will add more about my experience as a penetration tester. I already see the data, the CVP number has been transferred from the client to server. But don't worry, because your data is safe because it is encrypted. So no other party can see your CVV number, and don't be worried about inputting your CVV number in the application. But you should consider the Melanie opinion to make sure that the application is safe to input before you input the CVV number. Okay. And next question. How to create a safe or great password? Is it required to change the password periodically to keep us safe? Please,
Okay.
Melanie.
So our government guidance on this is to use 3 random words and make sure you include a special character and a number on that. What people then think it's okay to do is use the same 3 random words but mixed up, and then to use the same characters but in a different pattern. Patterns are bad. So the best way is to obviously use a completely randomized password. So password managers tend to do these by default, so I would recommend that. But if it's one that you have to remember, then the advice is 3 random words and a letter and a character to do that. What was the other part of the question, sorry?
Is it required to change the password periodically to keep us safe?
So the only reason for changing your password was if you feel it's been compromised or hacked. So, you know, if there's no means or way for that password to get out, it was more to make sure that if it was ever compromised. So I think by using the website, Have I Been Pwned, you'll be able to find out, has that been compromised? You know, potentially if you're logging into devices that are used by other people, it's probably good behavior to change them regularly, because you can go into a computer and you can reveal by doing a little hack. You can, you know, hover over the password, you know, where it comes up with the dots. You can hover over that, right click, go to inspect, and where it says password, if you type in the word TXT, you can translate it, so you can hack it yourself. So if you use a password with your family members and they've stored their passwords in but you can't see it, it can be revealed. So if you're using your own personal devices, there's no chance of them being compromised, then, you know, there's no need to change your password unless you feel it has been compromised.
Okay, thank you, Melanie. Saya akan bicara bahasa Indonesia ya untuk teman-teman. Jadi kalau di Indonesia untuk aturan password sendiri itu, selama saya menjadi penetration tester, itu sudah ada ya password policy, kebijakan password untuk aplikasi. Jadi setiap aplikasi harus memiliki kebijakan password yang kuat. Misalkan karakternya harus minimal 8 dan harus mengandung alfanumerik atau alfabet dan angka, kemudian harus ada simbol juga. Dan kalau teman-teman nggak mau repot bikin passwordnya apa, biasa ada tuh namanya password generator. Itu kalian bikin aja, itu sudah sesuai dengan standar policy yang sudah diterapkan di aplikasi-aplikasi yang memang sudah sadar kalau password itu harus yang kuat, seperti itu. Dan seperti tadi Melanie bilang ya, kalau password itu memang harus selalu diganti, seperti itu ya. Oke. Next question. When we face a cyber attack or cyber breach in our business, should we close the application and develop a new application, or enhance the application security is good enough? And after the breach, Should we open the case to the public, or is it better to keep it secret as an internal case? Please, Melanie or Neil.
I think from a technical perspective, when you're talking about that from a penetration testing, I'd like to come back to you if that's okay. But with regards to the communication piece, I think it's always better to be honest. I think if there is an indication, obviously you don't want to alert people when there's no need to create scare or fear. But if you think actually that information is going to come into the public domain, then it's really important that you let them know that you've had a breach, but you're investigating it, because it shows that you care about your clients and their data, and that you're investigating it, and that you just need a little bit time to investigate. But then it's really important that you inform them of updates as to how the investigation's going. With regards to should you shut down and start again, it really depends on your coding structure. So secure coding, how do you develop that code? How do you test that code? How do you revisit the security life cycle of that code in development? So it depends how secure that application is. I'll hand back over to you from a technical perspective, if that's okay.
Okay, thank you. Ini saya bicara lagi dalam bahasa Indonesia untuk teman-teman partisipan. Kalau di Indonesia, ketika ada terjadi cyber breach, itu kebanyakan memang ditutupi ya kasusnya. Kalau seandainya teman-teman kemarin mendengar ada case KTP yang di-leak di sebuah deep web or dark web, itu tidak ada penjelasan terkait kenapa bisa KTP kita kena breach atau disebarluaskan di dark web. Itu kebanyakan di Indonesia lebih ke kita malu nih, kita takut nama kita tercoreng karena adanya breach ini, karena adanya kasus cyber security ini. Tapi ketika di luar negeri itu mereka lebih mempertimbangkan bagaimana dengan customer kita ya. Customer kita apakah mereka kalau seandainya kita membuka kasus ini dan memberitahu ke mereka, mereka mungkin bisa lebih bersiap-siap gitu loh. Bersiap-siap akun mana yang kemungkinan akan menjadi kasus selanjutnya, seperti itu. Dan tadi Melanie juga sudah menyebutkan kalau terjadi kasus cyber crime di organisasi kita atau di bisnis kita, sebaiknya kita mempertimbangkan sih untuk memberikan laporan secara publik ya ke publik ya, supaya customer kita tuh setidaknya tahu kalau mereka kalau akun mereka kemungkinan kena breach seperti itu, supaya mereka bisa bersiap-siap gitu. Oke. Next question. What do we need to be aware of in maintaining cybersecurity regarding the metaverse, namely the transition from the real world to a three-dimensional virtual world, where everything is designed and developed through digital technology and all contribute to that transformation in the future?
Sorry, I didn't quite catch that. Could you recap that again for me? Sorry.
Okay. What do we need to be aware of in maintaining cybersecurity in the three-dimensional virtual world, where everything is designed and developed through digital technology and all contribute to that transformation in the future in three-dimensional world?
Yeah, so obviously everything is interconnected, and it's really, really important we understand what apps are connected and what the security settings for each of those apps. And I think one of the worst habits that we have as users is that when we're trying to connect one app to another, is it comes up with this really, 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 really long list of acceptance or disclaimer, and do you agree to it? And we don't ever read it. We just tick it and accept it. And I think there needs to be a real push from us as a technology industry to try and get people to change what are those terms and conditions, so that it highlights what data is being shared and what isn't being shared, because the onus is very much on us as individuals to review all those terms and conditions and to know what information we're sharing, when the reality is we don't. We just do the tick box to authorize the application. So I think it's really, really important from a technical point of view to be able to see. So when going into your applications, looking at the privacy privacy settings, what information is being shared. As I say, from anybody who's got a smartphone, you'll know that the moment you take on a new application, it wants to connect it across the board with every single other application, all your contacts and everything else like that. And we just need to be mindful that we're restricting it to the most minimal amount of information possible. Is there anything that you wanted to add on that?
Okay. That's great. Neil, maybe you want to add some more?
I think that was a wow question, and from a technology point of view, way beyond my area of knowledge, but similar to what Melanie's saying is that by design, we need to consider the end user and making it simple for people to understand the risks involved when they're accessing some form of digital technology.
Oke, teman-teman mungkin sebelumnya pernah mengikuti sesi sebelumnya di talk discussion bersama dengan Mbak Nucha dan Mbak satu lagi yang dimana mereka menjelaskan tentang terms and condition. Ketika kita install aplikasi, muncul terms and condition, dimana kita kalau seandainya nggak approve dengan terms and condition itu, kita nggak akan bisa pakai aplikasi itu, gitu. Nah, pernah nggak sih teman-teman membaca terms condition yang dari atas sampai bawah itu panjang banget? Gitu. Kebetulan teman saya ini ada yang rajin ngebaca terms and condition, dan salah satu yang dia baca adalah aplikasi payment untuk ngebayar, gitu ya. Tapi bukan banking. Di situ tertulis dengan jelas kalau si perusahaan yang buat aplikasi itu tidak akan bertanggung jawab apabila terjadi cybercrime atau data breach. Ketika terjadi data breach, semua akan menjadi tanggung jawab si customer. Dan mereka tidak akan bertanggung jawab atau tidak akan memberikan ganti rugi. Tapi hanya akan menotifikasi kita sebagai customer kemungkinan adanya data breach seperti itu. Nah, itu kan sedikit ngeri ya, gitu ya teman-teman ya. Tapi mau gimana lagi, kita membutuhkan aplikasi itu. Kita butuh untuk menggunakan aplikasi itu, dan pasti kita oke-oke aja. Dan yang bisa kita lakukan adalah kita keep ourselves safe, gitu ya. Kita harus menjaga diri kita sebaik mungkin supaya enggak oversharing, seperti yang sudah dijelaskan di part sebelumnya ya, CybHER part sebelumnya, gitu. Okay, last question, Melanie and Neil, from me. As a CEO and founder or COO in Bob's business, have you ever noticed or faced any human errors that was done by your employees in your company? And how did you address the problem?
Of course. We're a business, we're human, without a shadow of a doubt. And I think it's recognizing that two things: we've got a really, really good open policy. So if anything happens, my argument is put your hand up and tell me it's happened, because I can do something about it. It's when something's happened and it's not. So, you know, the most common mistake of a lot of juniors is sending out an email campaign and including multiple contacts within the to field, and sharing all the user data. And you know, it's a steep but good learning curve for new starters. And you know, it's these things happen, but it's really, really important to be part of the training. So in order to avoid that, we make sure that is one of the first things that anybody with external communications does, is understand how to do email etiquette, how to send an email by making sure that the participant, their details are put into the BCC field, blind carbon copy, rather than the to field, so that the data is not shared. Thankfully, on these occasions that they've happened, the data that has been shared has been within clients that have known each other. It's not necessarily been a huge risk for us. I think the other examples of data breaches is people phoning up and asking for information. And again, when something didn't quite feel quite right, my team have come and said, I've just received this phone call and they've asked this. So it's about just the team knowing when something doesn't feel right that they must report it. But as I say, it's a learning curve. We all make mistakes and we are all human, but it's how we handle that and deal with that that's the most important thing. Because if you deal with that in a negative way, then that potential threat becomes an insider threat, and therefore you've got that resistance against the organization. But yeah, so it's really important that it's handled quickly. We have a really good information security management system. So we have implemented ISO 27001. So we've followed the controls and we've grown with it. It's a journey. It's not an easy thing to achieve, and it's about the evolution of that. But although it seems a huge commitment to be able to implement a number of controls around suppliers, around system access, around various different elements, I would say as a business, it's helped us with our growth as well, because it's made sure that we've been able to prevent security breaches, be able to react quickly, but also grow as well. So although it seems a huge investment and a bit scary and a bit daunting, it's a journey, one that should be taken really slowly, and improves the efficiency of the business. We're a lot more efficient, in terms of the mistakes that we used to make, we don't make them anymore. So it's definitely something worth implementing. Neil, anything to add?
For me, it's about expectation. So as a management team, we are very clear to our staff that human error is going to happen. You will never, ever reduce it to zero, but set the expectation that if you report it, we debrief it, we learn from it, then the business is better for it. And I always go back to everything, not just mistakes or errors. Everything with our business is about consistency. If you're consistent and good most of the time, it will allow you the opportunity to have that little error every once in a while. So it's really important to get that trust for them to feel they can come to you and report the issue, that it can be fixed. And that is down to good leadership.
And that touches on the point that you made earlier about communications, because we are then able to reach out to our clients and tell them that this error has occurred. And actually, in all the times, operating the business for over 15 years, I think I've had to sort of maybe email my clients 2-3 times to say that we've had this communicational error. And every single time, I think the response has always been really positive as to how we've handled it. Thank you for informing us, for letting us know. And we're really grateful. And each time they've all come back and said, it's good to know that, this is what your bread and butter is, this is what you teach, but good to know that you're still human as well. So I don't think ever we've had any resistance to really positive communication. So it's about getting it and letting people know that you're actually trying to minimize risk.
Okay, thank you, Melanie and Neil. One other question, please. The real last. Okay, let me check. Usually when we develop artificial intelligence or AI or data science project, it requires huge amount of data set, such as facial image, etc. I have concern if one day we may collect data set improperly, then we will get the data scandal. Would you please give advice on how to collect data set properly for product development and to avoid the data scandal?
Yeah, so there are a few things you can do here that you need to be mindful of, and it's following, to be honest with you, the very simple data protection rules, which is don't obtain information that you don't need, don't retain it for any longer that you need, and make sure it's used for the purpose for which you've asked for it as well. So, and just from a security point of view, where you're storing that data, make sure it's secure, and that if in the event of a breach, you're able to identify and let people know that there has been a breach. So the simple, it's following the simple basic guidance of data retention and data protection, of only retaining the information you need. I can understand the concerns, definitely, because you don't want to be part of that scandal. But if you adopt good security hygiene and systems and you follow the guidance, you can only do what's within your realms of doing and making sure that it's secure, but don't collect any data that is not necessary. Don't retain it for any longer than it needs to be retained, and make sure that when you destroy that information, that you do it securely and you confirm that that information has been, destroyed in the correct manner.
Oke, sedikit tambahan ya teman-teman. Jadi kalau teman-teman ingin mendevelop suatu aplikasi dan itu adalah aplikasi mobile seperti Android atau iOS, itu sudah ada guideline-nya di developer Android atau developer iOS untuk data storage, secure data storage. Nah, di situ ada beberapa kayak semisal ketika menyimpan data itu harus seperti apa, dan untuk seperti permission seperti location, kamera dan sebagainya itu juga sudah diatur seperti apa yang critical, high dan low risk gitu ya. Jadi teman-teman bisa baca dari situ jika memang berniat untuk develop aplikasi AI atau aplikasi apapun gitu ya yang based on mobile. Seperti itu mungkin tambahan dari saya. Okay, so the Q&A session has already been done. Thank you, Melanie and Neil, for sharing with us. That was very interesting. Okay, teman-teman partisipan, jadi saya sedikit simpulkan ya untuk sharing hari ini. Ketika kita bicara tentang cybercrime, nggak pernah terlepas dari human error. Dan seperti yang sudah dijelaskan oleh Melanie and Neil, ada beberapa yang bisa menyebabkan human error. Salah satunya adalah kurangnya awareness atau kesadaran tentang security. Nah, ini saya mau cerita sedikit nih. Jadi, berdasarkan pengalaman pribadi di kantor saya, yaitu Horangi, kami pernah melakukan proyek rekayasa sosial, atau bahasa kerennya social engineering, ke salah satu klien kami, yaitu rumah sakit gitu ya. Nah, di sana kami pura-pura jadi staff IT di rumah sakit ini. Keren kan? Dan yang jadi refleksnya di sini adalah ketika kami diantar oleh resepsionisnya langsung ke salah satu ruang meeting mereka, tanpa ditanyakan dengan jelas alasan kedatangan kami itu untuk apa gitu. Kan ruang meeting itu kan cukup tidak bisa didatangi atau dimasuki oleh orang-orang yang tidak berkepentingan. Dan lebih parahnya lagi, ruang meeting mereka ini ternyata punya akses ke jaringan internal si rumah sakit. Jadi kami punya cukup akses nih untuk mengakses data-data sensitif mereka. Nah, ini salah satu pentingnya security awareness dari karyawan kita gitu ya. Ngeri banget ya teman-teman ya, dan tapi untungnya kita dapat awareness dari Melanie dan juga Neil. Nah, oke, untuk sesi presentasi dan Q&A sudah selesai. Saya akan kembalikan ke MC. Silakan Kak Melody.
Terima kasih Kak Tata sudah memimpin diskusi yang sangat bermanfaat sore ini. Terima kasih juga untuk Melanie Oldham, Chief Executive Officer of Bob's Business, dan Neil Frost, Chief Operating Officer of Bob's Business. Teman-teman, thank you very much for joining us today, and we hope to see you again on another occasion, karena ini benar-benar sangat bermanfaat ya sesinya. Semoga bisa ketemu lagi sama Kak Tata dan teman-teman dari Bob's Business di kesempatan lainnya. Bye-bye! Oke, teman-teman peserta, gimana nih? Kita udah ngobrol sekitar 1,5 jam ya, dan dari tadi tuh teman-teman banyak banget nanya hal-hal yang teknis gitu ya, bahkan yang aku aja bahkan nggak kepikiran gitu, kok ada ya ternyata masalah-masalah atau kasus-kasus cyber security yang mungkin kita nggak sadari gitu dalam kehidupan sehari-hari. Nah, kalau aku sendiri tadi merasa diingatkan kembali ya tentang banyak hal, tapi yang paling utama adalah memang untuk selalu bersikap kritis, berpikir berulang kali sebelum kita masukin data pribadi apapun ke internet gitu ya. Jangan mudah memberikan data pribadi ke siapapun. Nah, mungkin teman-teman juga masih ingat nih beberapa waktu lalu sempat ada sebuah tren gitu ya di Instagram ketika teman-teman diminta untuk share berbagai hal di fitur share Instagram Story gitu. Misalnya share nama ibu kamu, nama pacar kamu, foto rumah kamu, foto anak kamu, dan lain sebagainya. Nah, banyak dari kita yang nggak sadar bahwa sebenarnya itu sendiri adalah modus untuk mengumpulkan data pribadi loh, teman-teman. Jadi, yuk kita lebih berhati-hati, jangan mudah tergiur untuk ikut tren di media sosial ya, just keep everything to yourself, biarkan data-data itu kita aja yang tahu gitu ya, orang lain nggak usah tahu, nggak masalah gitu ya. Kemudian juga hati-hati nih sama pesan bodong. Kalau tadi Melanie mencontohkan pesan yang masuk ke email, nah di Indonesia sendiri kasusnya masih banyak yang tertipu sama SMS undian, katanya selamat menang undian dari toko online apa gitu, dan masih banyak juga yang tertipu gitu ya, terjebak dalam modus penipuan tersebut. Jadi teman-teman lebih berhati-hati juga, jangan mudah terpercaya dengan modus-modus penipuan. Dan yang terakhir juga adalah bacalah syarat dan ketentuan sebelum daftar di aplikasi atau website. Nah, kalau yang ini saya sendiri juga suka nggak baca nih sebenarnya teman-teman. Jadi mulai hari ini yuk kita budayakan membaca syarat dan ketentuan sebelum klik agree atau klik setuju. Oke, sip ya teman-teman ya. Nah, kalau teman-teman tadi dapat refleksi apa aja nih selama diskusi, yuk kita sampaikan cerita-ceritanya di kolom chat, biar semakin rame nih kolom chatnya ya. Oke, teman-teman, yuk. Sebelum kita lanjut, saya ingin mengumumkan nama 4 pemenang CybHER Quiz pada acara diskusi panel CybHER di hari Sabtu 12 Februari lalu. Yuk, mungkin bisa kita tampilkan di layar segera. Pemenangnya adalah @catyuan_, kemudian @grvtym, kemudian @luheka, dan terakhir @salsabila ELF 403. Selamat kepada teman-teman para pemenang CybHER Quiz mendapatkan kursus pelatihan keamanan siber gratis dari Bob's Business. Yeay, tepuk tangan untuk para pemenang kita. Yeay, teman-teman. Kalau mau dapat pelatihan keamanan siber lagi dari Bob's Business nih, buat teman-teman yang belum kebagian, jangan lupa datang ke acara CybHER besok ya, di hari Sabtu 19 Februari, karena kita akan adain lagi nih CybHER Quiz khusus buat teman-teman yang belum dia dari Bob's Business. Alright, teman-teman, sebelum kita lanjut lagi, sekarang saya ingetin teman-teman untuk mengisi post-test acara ini lewat link yang sudah tersedia di kolom chat ya, teman-teman. Silakan dibantu oleh tim moderator chat dan Girl Cyber Force nih, yang dari tadi sudah meramaikan dan berinteraksi langsung dengan para teman-teman peserta CybHER. Silakan diisi post-testnya untuk melengkapi pretest yang sudah diisi di awal acara. Dan ini sangat penting ya teman-teman, karena kami hanya akan merilis sertifikat bagi peserta yang mengisi pretest dan post-test di seluruh rangkaian acara CybHER. Oke teman-teman, lanjut lagi. Sekarang saya mau ajak teman-teman untuk berpartisipasi dalam CybHER Ambassador Creative Campaign. Ya, CybHER Ambassador Creative Campaign adalah salah satu rangkaian program CybHER yang dirancang untuk memberikan edukasi seputar kampanye keamanan siber. Nah, di CybHER Ambassador Creative Campaign ini, kita ingin menggalakkan kampanye keamanan siber dimanapun kita berada, agar semakin banyak orang yang memahami keamanan siber. Nah, aku mau undang nih teman-teman semua untuk ikut membagikan harapan teman-teman untuk masa depan dunia siber Indonesia melalui Instagram dengan mengunggah Twibbon CybHER yang sudah kami siapkan. Nah, silakan diposting dari tanggal 11 sampai 23 Februari 2022. Jadi masih ada waktu sampai minggu depan bagi teman-teman untuk mengupload foto diri teman-teman dengan Twibbon CybHER. Oke, bagaimana sih caranya supaya bisa ikutan? Yang pertama adalah teman-teman foto diri dengan kertas atau papan yang bertuliskan harapan untuk masa depan dunia siber di Indonesia. Lalu gabungkan foto kamu dengan frame Twibbon I am a CybHER Ambassador yang bisa kamu temukan di folder CybHER Twibbon yang tersedia di layar, linknya. Kemudian unggah foto kamu dengan Twibbon tersebut di akun Instagram dengan caption yang nanti akan kami tampilkan. Kemudian tag @UK Indonesia Tech Hub, @UK in Indonesia, dan @Instellar ID. Oke, buat kamu nih yang sudah nggak sabar mau ikutan, kita sudah siapkan paket lengkap instruksi postingnya, dan juga Twibbonnya semuanya udah lengkap, bisa diakses di link bit.ly/CybHER/Twibbon. Nah, buat teman-teman yang belum familiar nih, gimana sih caranya masang Twibbon di foto gitu kan? Teman-teman bisa menggunakan aplikasi Twibbonize ya. Jadi teman-teman tinggal pilih template Twibbonnya. Kami sudah sediakan yang warnanya putih dan biru. Kemudian pasang foto kamu dengan foto diri yang tadi bertuliskan harapan kamu di sebuah kertas atau papan. Kemudian tinggal save, download, dan upload di Instagram gitu ya. Bisa dilihat langsung di layar. Nah, kemudian saya sendiri juga sudah membuat contohnya nih ya. Saya punya mimpi seperti ini, bisa dilihat di layar. Saya punya harapan bahwa suatu hari nanti selain bebas aktivitas hacking, phishing, dan segala macamnya, saya juga pengen internet di Indonesia aman dari pelecehan seksual. Nah, di sini saya sudah menggunakan foto saya dengan kertas yang sudah saya tuliskan dengan harapan saya, kemudian saya padukan dengan Twibbon dari CybHER. Oke, jadi nanti teman-teman juga bisa mencontohkan ya nih, supaya kita bisa semakin meramaikan Cyber Ambassador Creative Campaign. Dan pada akhirnya nanti di Demo Day pada tanggal 26 Februari, kami akan memilih 3 Best Ambassador Creative Campaign di antara semua foto yang masuk ya. Jadi nanti teman-teman yang menang Cyber Ambassador Creative Campaign ini akan dapat hadiah yang sangat menarik yang nanti akan saya sampaikan. Oke, selengkapnya tentang Cyber Ambassador Creative Campaign, mari kita saksikan video berikut ini. Nah, gimana teman-teman, seru kan? Yuk kita wujudkan keamanan siber bagi perempuan Indonesia dengan turut serta dalam Cyber Ambassador Creative Campaign. Nah, kalau teman-teman peserta CybHER nih, yang semuanya merasa kita butuh banget nih keamanan siber di Indonesia untuk ditingkatkan, yuk jangan ragu untuk upload foto teman-teman di Instagram dengan Twibbon I am a Cyber Ambassador untuk meramaikan kampanye Cyber Ambassador. Oke, teman-teman, akhirnya kita sudah tiba di akhir acara. Saya ucapkan terima kasih banget, terima kasih sebanyak-banyaknya atas semangat, antusiasme, pertanyaan, dukungan teman-teman semua untuk acara diskusi kita sore ini. Nah, selain itu, saya juga mau undang nih teman-teman untuk ikutan dalam acara CybHER lainnya, yang masih ada nih sampai minggu depan ya. Kita masih punya beberapa acara lagi yang teman-teman harus ikut karena sudah kami rancang spesial buat peserta CybHER. Oke, kita bisa lihat program schedule di sini. Sekarang kita sudah ada di rangkaian acara keempat, dan kita masih ada 2 kelas lagi beserta 1 kelas co-creation di weekend minggu depan. Oke, teman-teman bisa ikutan acara CybHER berikutnya, yaitu pada tanggal 19 Februari 2022, pukul 10 sampai 11 pagi, dengan topik berkarir gemilang di dunia keamanan siber untuk perempuan, bersama Natasha Amadea, Lead Cyber Security Consultant Horangi. Kemudian diikuti dengan acara pada siang harinya, yaitu tentang bijak kelola data untuk bisnis sukses go global, masih bersama Natasha Amadea, Lead Cyber Security Consultant dari Horangi. Nah, kemudian setelah itu, di minggu depannya lagi, kita punya acara yang ditunggu-tunggu nih oleh kita semua, yaitu kegiatan co-creation dan demo day bersama Agustin Meriska dari Meta Innovation Lab dan Ahmad Aziz dari campaign.com di tanggal 25 sampai 26 Februari 2022 pukul 9 sampai 17 waktu Indonesia Barat. Nah, teman-teman, co-creation ini sesi yang sangat berbeda dengan sesi CybHER sebelumnya, karena di sini kita bisa lebih interaktif dan juga bisa langsung praktek bikin kampanye online tentang keamanan siber. Di sini teman-teman nanti akan belajar kampanye keamanan siber bersama dua fasilitator kita dari Meta dan campaign.com. Sayangnya acara ini terbatas hanya untuk 100 peserta, teman-teman. Gitu ya. Jadi 100 peserta ini adalah peserta CybHER yang terpilih. Nah, bagaimana caranya untuk daftar? Kamu bisa segera klik link yang sudah tersedia di kolom chat dan juga di grafik, dan juga di scan QR code yang tadi sudah tersedia, nanti akan dikirimkan kembali oleh admin ke grup WhatsApp teman-teman ya. Nah, teman terpilih nih untuk ikut co-creation dan demo day, kamu berkesempatan untuk kampanye yang tentunya penting banget nih buat kita semua ya. Kita sudah tahu, kita sudah belajar nih dari minggu lalu pentingnya keamanan siber. Nah, sekarang kita waktunya berkampanye nih supaya lebih banyak orang yang tahu pentingnya cyber security. Kemudian di akhir sesi co-creation dan demo day, kita akan memilih 5 tim dengan presentasi terbaik untuk mendapatkan kesempatan berkampanye dan dibimbing langsung oleh ahli kampanye dari campaign.com. Wah, ini sebuah hadiah yang nggak akan bisa ditemukan dimanapun ya, teman-teman. Jadi, yuk ikutan co-creation dan demo day. Caranya daftar di link yang tadi sudah tersedia ya. Oke, teman-teman, sudah tiba di akhir acara nih. Akhirnya benar-benar sudah di akhir acara kalau tadi kata Kak Tata ya. Pertanyaan yang seakhir-akhirnya gitu. Ya, teman-teman, terima kasih banyak atas kesempatannya untuk kembali bertemu hari ini. Semoga besok juga bisa bergabung lagi di acara CybHER berikutnya, dan rangkaian program CybHER Internet Aman untuk Perempuan, dukung oleh Traga dan Mitronix, Female Daily Work, Femalepreneur Indonesia, Generation Girl, Girl in Tech Indonesia, Herpreneur Lab, Stellar Woman, Block 71 Yogyakarta, Campaign.com, Satu Tampa, BINUS School of Computer Science, Cyber Security Community BINUS, Ikatan Mahasiswa Sistem Informasi Indonesia, dan Universitas Catur Insan Cendekia. Terima kasih banyak atas kontribusi peserta program dan teman-teman pada hari ini untuk internet yang aman bagi perempuan Indonesia. Saya Melodia Apriliana undur diri, sampai jumpa di acara CybHER berikutnya. Selamat sore!
Recording stopped.